Welcome to Gullah Talk, where we moving forward, onward, and upward through culture, education, and economics. On this episode, I have none other than my uncle, Eduardo Curry, Esquire, who's here to talk to us about law, understanding it, and the whole justice system. This is Gullah Talk. Like, share, and subscribe. How you doing, Uncle Curry?
Thank you very much. You can call me Uncle Eduardo. It's okay. All is good. All is well.
Man?
I appreciate you having me on here. I really, really like the young warrior, the young Turk who won't sit down. You know, it's a great opportunity for me.
Yes, I read your bio. Well, I knew this a long time. You're from Florida, Montecito, Florida?
That's right. I lived in Miami for a long time. My father was originally from Mississippi. My mother was from Florida. He left Mississippi when he was about 13. Went down to where his sister lived and ended up out in Miami. And, you know, living in the barrios and growing up on the corner and those kinds of things. But it worked out for him.
Yes, Carroll City?
Yeah, man. Yes. Carroll City, Liberty City. Down there, yeah.
I got some family.
Down in the Grove and all that. You know how it is.
Yes.
Everybody know I'm walking around. Back in those days, they had, they'd wear khakis and white shirts. You know, he thought he was a bad man, rolled up his shirt, got a little scar here, hanging out with the boys. Got
showing
his
the scars.
Yeah, showing the scars. Got him a little pea shooter here on the corner. And he met an old lady, who said, son, so the Spirit of the Lord told me, you shouldn't be out here. Why don't you come to church with me? And it changed his life.
Wow.
From the gang, you know, from the street gang to God's gang, and moved forward. Yeah.
So talk about your educational matriculation. So I noticed you had a business degree?
Yeah. Well,
I read up on you.
Yo, man, you're on the point. You're definitely on the point, Brother Trevor. You know, what happened was 7th grade, and I was in high school, and so from high school, I ended up going to get an associate business degree from Thomason College in accounting. And then from there, I'd gone to the University of Tennessee in undergrad in criminal justice and with a minor in sociology. Was in my last year getting my undergrad degree at the University of Tennessee. Took a class. It was a class about 70, 80 people in there, almost mostly white down to a person, and a white professor, a retired guy. His name is Russell B. Henson Jr. And I remember the class, Sociology of Law. All right, it's a book, a lot of words, no pictures, small lies. But he required you to read the stuff. So, you know, reading it, he'd ask questions. I'd raise my hand. It's an evening class. You know, everybody in there half asleep, half drunk, half this. I'm raising my hand, and we're having these conversations about Max Weber, you know, and Nietzsche, and all these other philosophers. And so one day he said, Mr. Curry, can I see you? It was like maybe 2/3 of the semester going on. So I looked, because I came from a household where education was premium. My father he worked at a steel mill and was a country preacher. He'd come home after taking a shower, steel mill, get in his suit, and when a report card day, he would sit down at the table. My mother would lay out 8 report cards. Okay, the roaches would stop running, the flies would stop flying, the birds would get still. Okay, because old boy would look at those report cards. If you got less than a B, you got to beat him. Okay,
wow.
And so here I am sitting there. This guy says, "Hey, I want to see you." My heart starts pumping. I'm like, man, what did I do? Have I mucked up this class? They used the M word. Have I mucked up this class? What I'm going on? He says, have you ever thought about being a lawyer? I said, yeah, I want to be a lawyer. He says, well, have you taken the LSAT? I said, LSAT, what's that? He said, well, like the ACT, the SAT, you took one of those? I said, yeah, I took the ACT. He said, well, that's the LSAT, it's the entry. I said, well, when is it due? He says, in 2 weeks. So I went and bought a book, studied, took the LSAT, did well. So he comes back to me and says, how did you do? I told him. He said, well, what law school do you want to go to? Well, I didn't know any law schools, but I knew that the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had gone to Boston University. So I figured if they accepted him, maybe they'll accept me. And, and so I said Boston University. And then a school came by named Harvard, so I applied to that one. And so I told him about it. He said, well, have you ever thought about the University of Tennessee Law School? I said, no, I haven't. He said, why don't you apply? So I applied, and congratulations, I get this thing. I got into Harvard, no money.
Wow.
I got into Boston University, no money.
Wow.
University of Tennessee says you got a full ride, academic ride. You have a benefactor. Turns out the old guy who was my professor was a retired judge.
Wow.
And he had the Russell B. Henson Jr. Scholarship, full ride, all books, all tuition, and money in my pocket. I got a full ride.
Wow.
So I got a full ride in junior college, a full ride in undergrad, a full ride in law school. I ended up getting a master's, got a full ride in that in criminal justice. Then ended up going to law school, got a full ride in that, and then a full ride got my MDiv, master's in divinity for school. So yeah.
So you felt like, what kind of student were you? Felt like you were academically strong?
Yeah.
It seemed like your steps kind of ordered.
Yeah, well, first of all, I came from a family that we lived in the project, okay? And I'm proud of it because it built character. Mm-hmm. And what happened was my parents would say, we don't have a lot of money and we don't have a lot of wealth, but what we do have is smart. My mother was a valedictorian of Leon High School in Tallahassee, Florida. She was a valedictorian, but never went to college initially. She didn't go to college until we were all maybe in college. And why? Because her brother was playing with her and put some rice in her ear. And then her mother panicked and took a metal piece, started putting water in her ear, and then took a metal piece, started digging in it, and it busted her cochlear ear. So on one side, my mother was totally deaf. And on the other side, she was partially deaf, so she'd have a transmitter on this side, which was a hearing aid that went around the ear that would transmit the sound to this side. So my mother demanded that you look at her and that we spoke standard English. No slang, no Spanish, the King's English actually.
Yes.
And so you learned, she wanted pronunciation and enunciation. So even in Florida, she wanted to make sure you hit your I's and your T's and all of those other things. So anyway, so they were, my parents, my father started out with a 4th grade education, left and went to Florida, and he didn't get his GED until he was grown, but believed in education and believed that was the way out of poverty. And that's how it started.
So define law.
Law is a group of written directives that are derived from culture, derived from process, and derived voluntarily by people who give up some of their rights. Because if you don't give up your rights, there can be no law. All right? So you have to voluntarily say, I'm going to give up my rights. So when you look at things like the Constitution and the preamble to the Constitution, we hold these things to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator unalienable rights. Amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That particular phraseology was never designed for black and brown people and people of indigenous cultures, because when it was written by all white people, and that men, black men, weren't considered full men. They were, 3/4 of a man, all of that stuff. And so when you look at laws are voluntary rules that we capitulate to, that we say, hey, all right, we abide, which means that some people abide by and others don't. It's against the law to have a gun, all right? But that only applies to people who want to apply it to the law. If not, you can go out and buy a gun for $25. Maybe stolen, maybe broken or whatever. But so you don't have to abide by it. So it's a voluntarily giving in the United States for culture, mores, and voluntary relinquish of free rights.
So let's jump into it. Is justice blind?
No. As you know, I'm a retired professor from the South Carolina State University. Go Bulldogs. That's right. And one of the things that we are taught, that justice is supposed to be neutral and detached. It's supposed to be blind. However, justice, or the nebulous system of which we say it is, can only work as good as the people who operate it. And so what the problem has been in America particularly is that the people who've operated always had hidden agendas. Okay, and as a result, their hidden agendas, their culture, their mores, their values have seeped into their ability to be neutral and detached. So justice became just us. That's how you account for phenomena like how does 12% of the population account for over 65% of the people that are incarcerated or in parole and probation? When we know if the 12% of us, we've got to cut it in half because we know this. We've got elderly, we've got women, we've got children. So you're talking about less than 6% of a population accounting for 60% of the crime. That's a phenomenon that's unreal.
Talk about it.
Unreal. And so we talked about when we were off air, the striation. It used to be white male, white female, black male, black female. Through systemic racism, they changed that diagram. It's now white male, white female, black female, black male. That is by design. And it's designed to keep oppression. We're going to arrest disproportionately black males. We're going to make sure they don't get through school. One of the things I've often wondered, ADHD.
Talk about it.
How is it that our children now have that, and particularly black males? They have studies out that can say by the second and third grade, they've already identified young black males who will not be able to make it through the academic system, and now will be contributing factors to violence and to lawlessness. And so what is going on is that this diagram that we have, the reason it was done that way is to create more oppression, more distance. White males being on top, black females and black males being on the bottom. Something happened. When we tell you what happened? Sports.
Explain.
You know how I feel about it.
Oh, yeah.
I think the time is out for black males being the plaything to white America, okay? And we've allowed ourselves to, the narrative to be written for us. So you talk to little kids, and what do you want to be when you grow up? They say, I want to be a football player. I want to be a basketball player. I want to be a musician. You know, I want to be a musician. I said, well, you want to be a musician? Well, tell me, well, what instrument do you play? Well, I don't play any musician. I'm a rapper. Do you know you have more of a chance of being a neurosurgeon than you have of being a rapper and being successful? But that's what we've allowed our children to actually follow. So what is going on is that being the plaything of white America, they show us on TV all the time, and we fall in love. Everybody from Orenthal James.
Yes.
Well, for those of you who don't know, O.J. Simpson. Yes. Everyone from Orenthal James Simpson all the way to the sports icons now. We put them on there. Want to be like Jordan, want to be like Mike, want to do this. And so in this process of them recreating white male, white female, black male, guess what happened? White females started to adore the athletes.
Start liking us.
And as a result, it screwed up the whole paradigm that they were actually shifting.
Yes.
Okay? And so now you find they've got the money, the black male, and so, of course, as always, people are attracted to money.
Oh, yeah.
And so you've got now this issue of the browning of America. So now we've got people in politics fanning the flame of fire about, do you not feel safe? I had to tell one the other day, I said, I don't think that black and brown people in South Carolina have ever felt safe.
Yes.
Given the fact of racism.
Yes.
See my shirt?
No justice.
No justice, no peace, no racist police. So the justice system was infiltrated by people who had institutional racism in there. They had systemic racism in it, and as a result, it came out on how they met out justice. For example, 10, 15 years ago, you had crack and coke. You remember that dilemma?
Oh, yeah.
All right. 10 grams or more. What does a gram look like? For those of you who don't deal in crack, take 10 sweet and low packets. 10 grams or more, you face 10 years to life. But you had to have 1 pound, we call it kilo in the street, of cocaine in order to get a 10-year sentence. Why? White people use coke. Black people use crack.
Right.
The sentencing disparity was unconstitutional. Judges were handing out crazy sentences, entire generations of young men, and so it had to change. So it's there and it's here in America.
So seeing in this broken system, how is it being a black lawyer?
Well, there are a couple of things that have to be addressed, and I want to be frank with you. The first African-American lawyer in this area to practice law is a guy named Judge Richard Fields. Very revered, very respected. Get this, he's still alive. So as a black lawyer in today's world, we are pioneers. We don't have 100 years of practicing history with firms and with relationships. And so I can reach out and touch Judge Richard Fields today. He's alive, still practicing. But what that does is it creates a distance, a chasm between the black community and the black lawyer. So what you find is that people play games. They run advertising. Oh, I had a wreck, get a check. And if you look at the people that they use in their advertisements, those people are primarily African Americans because they play on the money game. And so as a result, our people haven't learned to trust us because they don't have enough history. The only time they've been going to black professionals or white professionals is that's all they've had. And so now they got the black lawyer. They're learning to trust us. But in reality, all they've had is only white lawyers.
So what do you do to get them to trust you?
Wow. Well, first of all, par excellence. At our firm and what I do as a lawyer is I'm going to give you what you paid for, and I'm going to do it at such a high level. I think a lot of people forget. They forget. I went to the same law schools they went to. I had to pass the same bar, which is the litmus test for competency, and I have to do the same kinds of things. But somehow in their minds, the black group of people who use lawyers and poor people seem to think it's my color of the lawyer that gives my justice. That's a flawed premise.
Is it?
Yes. You know why? Because if your color never changes, it doesn't matter what color your lawyer is. If black gets you trouble, you're going to get the trouble even if you got a white lawyer.
Talk about it.
So it's a flawed premise if you say that the color of my lawyer is going to get me better justice. All right? And that's a systemic issue that they look up, because when they go into a courtroom, who do they see? They see white judge, they see white bailiffs, they see white court reporters, they see white public defenders. The only people that they see white jail personnel, the only person they see black in there is themselves. Coming in there, and by the way, when you come into federal court, they hog chain you just like they do on the chain gang. Through your legs, around your feet, and your hands. So you see 15 or 20 guys walking like this. Like a chain gang. So automatically in my mind, I'm looking around, I'm the only black lawyer. I got to stand up and do what I do. Because if I don't, they just throw away the key, throw our lives away. So you have to get people to trust you. I do it also through advertising. I do it also through, we do nonprofit things. Our firm has fed 10,000 people in the pandemic. Okay. We also do things like Wills clinics. Giving, educating, letting folk understand that we're not just a regular Negro, but we're actually someone that is qualified, and you can justify paying me money because you're going to get what you paid for.
So given that most African Americans, as they portray, do a lot of the crimes, what if one say, I can't afford your service?
We work with people. I've taken on cases sometimes with people that had no money at all, but I felt the justice was being denied. Okay, but I want to go back to a previous statement that you said. We're portrayed as committing most of the crimes. That's part of the broke system. All right, you know how you do that is police areas that have high populaces of black people. The more you police the area, the more you're going to find infractions. If you went into a white area and you police the area the same way, you're going to find the same kinds of infractions. And so it is a disproportionate attention by a justice system that's ran by predominantly non-colored people who then focus on a particular community to try to see what they can find in terms. It's almost like a predisposition. We're going to go to the black community. But the more times you go into an area, the more things you will see in terms of infractions. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. When in reality, we only represent 12, according to them, even though I don't believe we represent 12% of the population, I believe we represent more. Let me tell you why. In projects, census takers don't go into every one of the houses. You know what they do?
Absolutely.
Looks like 3 people live there.
Oh, yeah.
And then we also know about what happens in government subsidized housing. If people who are not supposed to be there shouldn't be there, when they leave before the housing people come, and they only come back when the housing people leave. So the busiest hours in a government subsidized housing is 7 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock in the evening. Because that's when the people who monitor who's supposed to be there are gone. All right? So if the office is going to open at 8 o'clock, the guy who's laying up in the house with the girl, he's leaving at 7:30 so that when the house opens and they come in to spray and do all this stuff, only she and her kids are there. At 6 o'clock, when they close down and they leave, he comes back at 6:30, and that's what goes on. And it's just self-fulfilling prophecy over and over again.
So you mentioned police officers. Should we defund them?
No.
From a lawyer's perspective?
No. We need police officers in a certain respect. But what we need to do is reallocate, not defund. See, defund is a talking word. Okay, when we talk about talking points. Defund means like, oh, you're going to take away all the money for the police and we're not going to have any police on the street. No, what we need to do is sit down, rebudget, and reallocate funds. So we're not defunding, you can't give the police 100% of the money. We need for community development, for outreach, for retraining. We need for racial sensitivity training. So you have to go back and reallocate. We can't get the police all new guns this year. We're going to buy all new Glocks. We're going to buy all new AK-47s. And we're going to buy all new armor-piercing bullets. And we're going to buy all new shells to protect us and all new cars. No. You got to send some of them back. We got to do some psychological evaluations. Okay, we're going to have to do some sensitivity training. We're going to have to make sure that they understand that not every person they arrest fits neatly as a criminal. Do you not know that what's on the rise? Mental health.
Oh, yeah.
So when I come to you and you have mental health issues, you might not be a candidate to go to jail, but you surely may be a candidate to go to mental health. They have to be able to differentiate between that and do something. That requires training. So rather than defund the police, they don't need another Glock. They just got one last year. They hadn't fired that one except in the range. You don't need a new Glock. What you need is, let me send you to some psychological evaluations. Let me find out if you have chemical dependency. Oh, not every police officer is clean and sober. Some of them have mental health issues. Some of them have drinking issues. Some have chemical abuse issues. Some of them have stuff at home that they're going through, marital issues. Police officers are one of the highest stressful positions you can have, and they also have one of the highest divorce issues. So we can't, defunding is a nasty word. We need to reallocate funds in areas to address issues so that they can be performing better. Okay, mentally, emotionally, socially, psychologically. That's what I believe.
So another thing I noticed when I see a lot of lawyers, politics. What's the bridge between that? Why most politicians has that Esquire behind it?
That's a great question. What happened, do you not know 100 years ago when we had South Carolina legislation that black people was the predominant legislator? But over a period of time, you've had metamorphosis. And if you stop 30 years ago, a magistrate in South Carolina only had to have a 3rd grade education 30 years ago. But over a particular process, what has happened is lawyers have now infiltrated because the complexity of the laws, the sociological, psychological, legal ramifications have become deeper. And so you find people who are trained in the law wanting to be a part of that. Now here is the ringer. that those people need to be qualified in terms of their social activity and in terms of their intellectual and psychological predisposition toward people of color.
Yes.
Because if not, they're going to pass the same Jim Crow laws that we had in the 1950s. They'll just get passed again. But they got polish on them now. Because remember, systemic racism is not overt racism. It's racism that is creeped down into the pores, the fibers, the sinews of a system. And so therefore, you don't see it. They smile in your face. It's kind of like let's use this as an example, a white teacher who's a racist talking to a first grader.
Yes.
Okay? She can have a smile on her face. Hi, Johnny. But be said with the words, you're stupid as you know what. The smile, they're playing that adult game. I'm smiling at you, but I'm still calling you stupid. And so what has happened is we have to be careful that we don't have people who are now polished in the system, understand the laws, but still pass them at a disproportionate rate that points to disproportionality for race and ethnicity and color and economics. Like I've seen some politicians, much to my dismay, all right, that has the temerity to follow up with government officials in fanning the flame of racial divide. Talking points. Do you feel unsafe in South Carolina? I'm curious. I'm curious what has made it now to be unsafe when, get this, you want to talk about people using guns, but you don't want to scale back on the Second Amendment. Every time you talk about scaling back on the Second Amendment, there's a big brouhaha. No, I have a constitutional right to do this. But then on the flip side, you know, South Carolina's number 11 in killing women in the family law issues. You know, got guns all out here. The problem is they want guns to exist, but they only want them to exist in the hands of rich people, white people, and folk that they want them to have it. They don't want them in the hands of poor people and that sort of stuff. But you can't have your cake and eat it too.
Mm. Are you thinking about going into politics?
I've thought about it. As you know, I'm an itinerant elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. In fact, I'm an international judge in the AME Church. There are 9 of us worldwide, and I'm one of 9. I've thought about it, you know, moving forward. But I've also said to myself, maybe my job is not to be the king, but to be a king maker. That there are young Turks like yourself, young warriors who just need the advice. And that's what's happening with the children that are crying out in the protest. It's not that protesting is wrong, because we have a First Amendment right to what? Peaceful assembly. First Amendment right to what? Free speech. It's amazing they want to curtail the people who want to curtail those rights. All right, when it's to their advantage or disadvantage. But when it's someone else's advantage, they don't want them to use it. I think that my job is to get the 21st century warrior ready, emotionally, mentally, psychologically, academically, so that they understand that the world as they see it is not as they see it. Like I see this all the time. I'm not against this. This is not race baiting. I see white boys and white girls, they got people that are not in their race. I always remind brothers and sisters, you see, if you've got a white significant other, understand they're white. And there are some places that you're going to go that it's not going to be well received. And so you've got to let them understand that race relations, we're not living in a utopia. This is a society where they actually see black is black and white is white, and they're Aryans and people who talk about the dilution of the race and that why we should be there. We've got someone in the head of government who's fanning that right now. Race baiting, fanning division. Are you not safe? You know, do you feel uncomfortable? And it's trying to put us back in pre-1970 stuff. In the 1960s, we had all kinds of violence against government officials, against each other. That's where he wants us to go, back to that society. And it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. So a long answer to a short question, I've thought about it, but I think that I would be better as an instructor with the young Turks who need to understand all of the parameters so that they are well-versed live and understand that it's not just the glamour of being in Congress, the glamour of being as a legislator, the glamour of being, in government, but you have a social responsibility. To them, much is given, much is required. And it requires you to stand up, not try to make money, but to make sure we pass laws that are equal and fair and just and are applied across the board even-handedly, neutrally, and detached.
Wow. I noticed throughout the conversation you talked about you being a clergyman.
Yes. How's
that in being a lawyer? Does the two conflict? Does faith conflicts with your
fear? No. Actually, God's law trump. And remember, if you talk about the derivative, we talk about God's law, you can go as far back as the Code of Hammurabi, Napoleonic codes, but you can go even farther back to Babylonian codes, and certainly you can go back to the Mosaic law. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, you see all that stuff. And so, if God's law is trump, if you ever play spades, I got the big joker, and as long as I don't have a card in the suit that you play, that big joker always trumps. So God's law is primary. Man's law, confidentiality, right to privacy, attorney-client privilege is secondary. And I treat it that way. I'm going to handle you with God's law, and then man's law with the rules that we have in the bar, ethics rules and rules of engagement. Those laws are secondary. And if you use it, it will always keep you right, because one is God's law, two is man's law.
But man's law could pay the bills, right? So would you take a case from somebody that's, I got the $100,000, I need you to defend me?
Yeah. Remember your role. In a justice system, and that's a great question, you've got the judge, you got the jury, you got the prosecutor, you got the defense lawyer, and you've got the accused, and you've got a victim. Okay, those are the 6 actors in criminal.
Oh,
and so what happens in your life is that everyone has to maintain their role. All right, my job as a defense lawyer is not to judge them guilty. That's the job of a jury or a judge or a trier of fact. My job is to make sure they have fair process.
Ooh.
Okay, and then make sure that at every corner that I zealously represent them within the bounds of the law. If they're found guilty, remember, that's not my role. That's the jury, the judge. The judge's role is to be neutral and detached as a referee. If you have a jury trial, they're the triers of the fact. They judge whether or not you're guilty or innocent. Prosecutor's role is just to find in their mind what is the truth. All right. So when you look at the police role is to clear by arrest. An arrest is merely a charging document that says, under probable cause, we believe a crime has been committed, and we believe that you might have been involved in that crime. It's not an absolute truth. It's just paper to be used to start a process. So for me, if you had $100,000, you said, hey, will you represent me? My position is, of course I would. And zealously I would. Okay?
I would.
Within the bounds of the law. I won't suborn perjury, which means I'm not going to have you lie on the stand, and I know you lied.
Absolutely.
All right? But as far as ethically and financially, of course I would. It makes sense. Why? Because you need a great African-American lawyer like me.
Yes.
I'm a voice of the people.
Is the fight more economic? Would you say that for African Americans?
That's a great question.
Entrepreneurs, because not to get on the long soliloquy, but protesting and all that is good.
Right.
But I feel like, what you feel is economic power, us coming together and just.
Well, you use the big word soliloquy. It's tough because what we're doing is we're doing an analysis that requires a foundational basis from an educational standpoint. But where you are is that I think that we don't understand the time value of money, all right, how money can work for you, how and what goes on in that. And so when you talk about the economic gap, and we talked offline about this, 1% of America owns 31% of America's resources, and 10% of affluent America owns 3/4 of America's resources. So when you start talking about the gap, not only do we have this economic gap, but it's getting wider. The rich are getting richer, and the poor are getting prison. Jeffrey Ryman wrote a book about that. And so what is happening is we're going to have to go back and retool, go back and learn time value of money, learn about how to prepare for working in real world, learn about the achievement gap. Think about this. If you don't go any further than high school and the opposing side goes through college, the only way to resolve that is that the person who went to high school has to find a trade that pays enough money to equalize it, because if not, you start out together and the person that went and got a job will be here, but the person who went into college is going to do this.
Yes.
And so what 20 years from now, you're still making this and they're making this. I always use the classic cases of doctors. Yes. They have to stay a long time in college, and people look at them and be like, oh my God, I'll never go. You don't make a first dollar till you're 30. Okay? By the time you're 35, you made $1 million. You're still making $50,000. Okay? So in your 10 years, that you worked, in the first year you made $1 million. In the second year, he made $2 million. All right? You understand how the flatness is? He's doing this, and you're still working here trying to get it. And so we have to understand what has happened in America. And what we've done is education is high priced. In fact, it's overpriced. Oh, yeah. All right? Totally. But that's what they sold us, and that's where we are. So what we have to do is go back to the drawing board. Reading, writing, arithmetic. Understanding the value of money. Learning to be savers and not spenders and consumers all the time. Understand about FICO scores. Understand debt to income ratio. Understand time value of money. Understand collateralization. Understand that if you don't have land, you are not considered a landed gentry in America, and therefore have no person. You say, well, I've got landlord-tenant rights. Yeah, you do, but you got to go to court to enforce them. But right now, you got to get out of my property.
So do you believe the preachers need to have a bigger voice in the justice system?
Well, absolutely, but they got played. And I'm saying this, and I want you to record this. The preachers got played this time because in the COVID thing, they closed all the churches. So when there's social unrest, isn't it amazing? There's no church unification because the churches are closed. Now, let me tell you the real fallacy of that. They still going to major department stores. They're still going to their jobs. They're still going to sporting events. They're still coming and doing everything they want, but they haven't loosened the churches, because the churches represent the moral compass for people. Always have. Your grandma, your mama, someone calls and says, wait a moment, God's not pleased. Stop that. So what you lack are the stalwarts from the churches who are able to reach these young Turks and young lions who are just crying out for justice but don't know how to quantify it because they've never seen a man killed in their eye based on racism. That's the thing when he put that knee on that boy's neck. Okay? But you know this? Your mama, my grandmama and them have seen that.
Several.
All right? They've seen that. But the problem is the new 21st century person has never seen it. So it shocked them like, what in the world is going on? What's the world going on? A racist cop has got his knee on a guy who's begging for his life and doesn't care who sees it because he doesn't believe anything's going to go badly for him. Because if he did, he'd at least put him in the car before he choked him. Okay? And so where you are with this is now you've got all these kids saying, oh, if they'll do it to them, they'll do it to me. All right? But the established crew already knew that. Why they would tell you ways of survival. Keep your hand in 10 and 2. Don't run your mouth when you're talking to a cop. Don't look a white person in the eye. Be careful that you're not going places with people who you don't identify with. One black person and 10 white boys is a bad mix. Okay? They told us some things. Are you sure you want to marry a white person? There are places you can go and places you shouldn't. When nightfall came, our parents would tell us, get home. Okay? But with the new restriction, they lessen all this stuff. So everybody like free love. I can be who I want to be. I can go where I want to go. And then you run into racism and you're like, what in the world is this? It's the same thing that was there. That white boy looked at you all night while you were dancing with that white girl and said, you know what? If I catch him, I'm going to put it on him. And if you look at that situation that happened in Minnesota, the cop and the victim had some prior interaction at a nightclub.
Wow. Beautifully put. Beautifully put.
So the only thing I'm saying is, you know, we've got a lot going on. And what I don't want to happen is for our young people to disproportionately be hurt because they lack direction. Because we got a racist president, okay? And you got people who are following his lead. Attorney General, police, National Guard, FBI, all of them following his lead. And what happens, do you know what happened in Charleston recently? Some of the people who were protesting, which would have been magistrate level offenses, 1,024 or whatever it is for the bond, and keep on moving.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know that they actually charged them with federal crimes? Which would have been a state crime, arson or burning, arson second, or maybe just breaking property. They actually have charged them with federal crimes. So you see, even a system that you think is just is allowing itself to be manipulated because the charging party is always the what? Police. Prosecutors don't go and charge people. Okay, I want you to get this straight. The boots on the ground are the police. Police are the watchdog of the ruling class. And that's why no justice, no peace, no racist police.
And my last thing, when you look at that camera, what advice would you give to the new millennial generation?
I would ask that you do your homework, that I feel your pain. I would ask that you get involved with people who are able to help you quantify your malcontent, your discontent. I would ask that you keep fighting, that you remember that you are somebody and that you have goals and focus. But don't squander it just for one thing. Have life purpose so that we can make this America's, because this is our country too. I'm not going anywhere else. If you've ever been to other places in other countries, you view it as a foreigner. America is great, and it can only be great if we make it great. No one can make it again. It's still great, but we need process. Be involved in the process at every angle. Always.
This is Gullah Talk. Like, share, and subscribe. No justice, no peace, no racist police. No justice, no peace, no racist police. You don't think we need to know what we up against?